Hello and welcome to Art is for Everyone. And today we are going to paint a tiny vase of mimosa flowers. And I was inspired to paint mimosas by a new color from my friend Kim, who makes the beautiful Wildthorne watercolors. And so we were going to be using I'm going to be using the Wildthorne watercolors today. I have 5 colors selected for my project. I have the Mimosa, which is a beautiful, clear, glowing yellow, and it's a new color from the Mimosa palette. And then I'm going to be using Viridian Green, which I believe you can buy singly, and then Cobalt Blue Primaire, and Wood Violet, and Gris Etan, which is a light gray. So these 5 colors. Now, if you don't have Wildthorne paints, I will list alternatives in the description box below. These are all colors that are in most watercolor sets, but there's something very precious and beautiful about these handcrafted paints that I'm really taken with, especially for these smaller projects. It makes it just that much more special to spend time with my paints and brushes and paper. So I'm going to move that aside for now and talk about my other supplies. I have a little flower mixing palette, and I'll move that aside. And then I have my Sennelier 000 squirrel mop, but any small pointed round would be fine. Any brush that's made for watercolor that has a nice fine point on it. And I'm going to be using a watercolor pencil, and this is a light gray. This one is by Watercolour. It's called Graphite Aquarelle. Actually, you know what? I'm going to change my mind. I'm going to use, you can use this. It tends to be a little bit darker when it washes out with water. So I'm going to use this Faber-Castell Albrechter watercolor pencil. So really any water-soluble pencil in a light gray would be fine. Even a light blue would be fine. Anything that's pale. And the reason I like this to do my drawing is that when I start to do the watercolor pencil just gets absorbed into the painting and creates a really lovely effect. Okay? So I'm going to be using that. And then I have here one of my Strathmore watercolor postcards. And these are super handy for these small projects. If you don't have the Strathmore watercolor postcards, you can use any watercolor paper. This has a cold press surface, okay? So I'm going to start with my drawing, and just like always, I'm going to start with basic shapes. And my vase, I'm going to just put a little bit off center, and I'm basically just going to draw a little circle. And I'll have the bottom of it curved, because it would be curved as we look at it on the table. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but just a little circle shape. Okay? And I'm going to draw some sprigs coming out of the vase. All right, I'm going to pretend like the top of it is open here. We won't really see that once we have the painting done. And I'm going to draw some sprigs out. So I'm just going to draw some straight lines coming out this way and this way. And maybe kind of out to the side, and maybe coming kind of up this way. So just a few just straight lines coming out of my vase. And I'll make those a little darker just so you can see them better. Okay. So I've got 5 of them, and that's plenty. All right. And that is really all I need to do for my drawing for this project. So I have the circle for the vase, and then I have the 5 kind of straight lines coming out, sort of in a fan shape. And they're all stemming, they're all beginning from here in the vase. And so where they all meet, I'm going to draw a couple of lines down, almost to the bottom of the circle. Just to show where the stems would come into my vase, okay? And we'll just very lightly enhance those once we put the water down. Okay, so I'm done with my pencil. I'm going to bring back my palette and my paints so you can see me mix. And I'm going to start with, actually start with a vase, okay? So I'm going to start with a water glaze on my circle, and I can turn my paper to make it easier for myself. And I'm just going to put a water glaze down all over that circle. A nice reservoir of water in the middle, and then bring it more carefully out to the sides. So we want as smooth of an edge as possible around the sides of our vase. Okay, and I just keep turning my paper because, you know, it makes it easier for me. I like to pull my paintbrush toward me. And so as you paint, you'll see what's the most comfortable position for you, and you can turn your paper accordingly. So I've got a nice water glaze down. And the first thing I'm going to do is pick up some of the cobalt blue and make a little puddle. And I want it to be fairly pale, so I'm going to add some water to it. These paints are highly pigmented, so you can add a little water and still get a nice strong color. And then I'm going to drop this paint down into the water glaze along the left side of my vase. So I'm just dropping it in and sort of moving it down toward the bottom. I want it to be fairly light and fluid. And then I'm going to add a little bit over on this side. Okay, so I've just got some light cobalt blue just dropped into that water glaze. And then I'm going to pick up some of the gris étain, so the lighter gray. And if you don't have a light gray, which would be like a Davies gray in your watercolor set, I will leave instructions on how to mix one. So picking up some gray, and I'm just going to drop some gray in here where there might be a shadow from the flowers and from the stems coming down. And then I'll just flick some gray through the blue down here to the bottom. I just want some variation in color, so I'm just flicking some blue, some gray through my blue. All right, I might put a little bit here, just a couple little spots here and there. And then I'm just going to clean my brush and use a wet brush to sort of drop water around where I put that gray, because I want it to be nice and soft. All right, and that's all I'm going to do for this step. So we're going to stop and we're going to let this dry, because our next step is to paint on top of this, and we want this to be totally dry. You know what? I lied. I'm going to take a little bit of green, of the Viridian. You could also use a sap green, just a tiny bit. And I'm just going to drop a tiny, tiny bit of this green where I might have stems and up toward the top. We can enhance that later. So you see, I'm just putting a little tiny bit. Now I'm done. So I will turn the video off, and then when it dries, I will be back. Okay, so my painting is now dry, and we can begin to add some flowers. And the flowers of the yellow mimosa are a very golden yellow. And so we're going to use this beautiful mimosa paint. If you don't have the mimosa paint, another yellow that you could use would be Hansa yellow or Windsor yellow. Anything that's a bright and clear yellow. And a little bit of opacity is okay for this. So I want to get a nice reserve of it in my palette. I want it to be pretty strong, so I'm grabbing as much pigment as I can. I'm mixing myself a nice little reservoir of it. And the reason I'm starting with the yellow flowers, we're going to be painting some green leaves as well, but I want to get that yellow down first, and then I can paint leaves around it, because if I put the leaves down first, the yellow might not cover over on top of the darker green leaves. So mimosas have these tiny little small florets on them. They're little round pom-poms. And there are lots of them on each sprig. And so these lines that I drew are going to be the stems, okay, and possibly also the leaves. So I'm going to be painting, near these lines in the direction of these lines. And I'm going to start at the top, and using the tip of my brush with plenty of yellow paint on it, I'm going to start painting little circles, okay? And I don't have to really paint a circle. I can just dab the paint on the paper. And I want to be really random with it. I don't necessarily want to be symmetrical, but I want to just sort of dance around the paper, filling in with these little dots, sort of random dots of yellow. Some are bigger, some are smaller, okay? So again, there's no rhyme or reason to it. Yours will probably look very different than mine, because you should just relax and have fun and enjoy putting these beautiful little golden drops of paint on your paper. So see how some are bigger, some are smaller. In some areas I might have quite a bit, like all massed together, so a big splotch of yellow. Sometimes they might be far apart. And I'm just sort of filling in this area where I've placed the lines with my tiny little florets, I guess you would call them. Some might come down here. And for sure, some are going to come right up to the vase. And we'll get some more yellow. And some will come down in front. Right over on top of the vase. And the vase is pale enough that you can paint right on top of it. I have a whole bunch right in here, maybe. Lots of yellow. Just grab more paint as you need it. Remember, we want it pretty strong, so even if your brush is wet and you go right into the palette, you should be fine. So grabbing some more. And I'm going to turn my paper now so I have a better angle. Some more water. See, I just keep grabbing more yellow paint as I go. And you see this line here, I'm going to leave that for mostly greenery. Okay, so if I turn it around again, I can see where I might need to add a little bit more just to balance it out a little bit. Okay. So I'm pretty happy with that. I don't need it to be totally even, but I just sort of want this random sweep of the yellow blossoms. And I even might take a little bit and put a couple down here that have fallen to the table. Okay. So while our yellow paint is still somewhat wet, okay, I'm going to take a little bit of the wood violet, so any kind of violet would be fine, and add it to my yellow to make a darker yellow. So it's just a little bit darker. I can just keep adding between yellow and violet until I get a nice kind of ochre yellow. And every now and then on my blossoms, I'm going to drop some of that darker yellow, just a hint here and there, especially toward the bottoms. Okay, so I'm just giving it a little bit of depth by dropping in just a touch of the darker yellow. I can turn my paper. So you see I'm not too much, but here and there, I'm just dropping in a little bit. And that just gives me some variation in that yellow. Put a little bit on these that have hit the table. Maybe a touch here. So just a tiny bit. So all I did was take my yellow and add a little bit of violet to it. This is the wood violet. Dioxazine purple, Windsor violet, those would all work. But again, just a little touch. So now, and you can see, I made a little yellow mark here down at the bottom of my paper, and when the painting is dry, I can remove that, and I'll show you how. So now I need to let this yellow dry, okay, so we can come back in and paint the green leaves. So I will see you in a bit. Okay, so my yellow flowers are now dry, and before we move on, I did want to show you how to correct this little blotch down here. And so I have a stiff synthetic bristle brush. This one is by Princeton Brush Company, the line Velvet Touch. The item number is 3950WB. It's called Willow's Blender, and it's in the 1/4 inch size. And I really like it for this purpose. So I'm going to dampen the brush in very clean water, and I have a spare piece of clean kitchen towel. So I'm going to dampen it, sort of wipe it off so it's not dripping wet, and I'm just going to lightly move my brush around where I spilled and then dab it up with my paper towel, and then I can clean my brush and do it again. And the thing is with yellow is notoriously staining, so it's never going to lift it entirely. You can work on it a couple times. You don't want to do too much, because the problem is that you can actually make it worse eventually and lift, kind of destroy the texture of the paper. But I can lift it up to where it's barely noticeable, okay? And the other thing I can do is I can take the same brush with clean water, and I can very lightly move it around the edges of my vase, and then just touch it here and there with my towel. So you see I'm being very, very careful. I'm not going anywhere near the yellow, and just dabbing it up. And all that does is to help remove any leftover watercolor pencil, and it just sort of softens that line that I created when I put my paint down. So totally not necessary, but if you want to, you can try that, okay? So now that we've lifted up my little yellow splotch, we're going to start painting some of the green leaves. And so for that, I'm going to mix my color first. So I'm going to take some more of that viridium, and I'm going to make a nice puddle of it with plenty of water. This is a really concentrated pigment, so you want plenty of water in there. And then I'm going to make another puddle of it, and I'm going to add just a touch, hair on my brush, just a touch of that wood violet to deepen it up a little bit. So I've kind of got this gray green. It's just a little bit darker than the viridian on its own. So I've got 2 puddles of green paint. I'm going to clean my brush and roll it to a point so I have a nice point on my brush. And I will be turning my paper a lot here because I really want to get that good angle. So mimosa leaves are sort of like little feathers, okay? And they come off the center stem in little spikes. And so I'm going to take some of my lighter green and get it on my paintbrush. And then I'm going to roll, or just kind of roll and touch my paintbrush to my paper towel because I don't want my brush to be dripping wet for this, okay? And I'm going to turn my paper upside down and I'm going to start putting in these leaves. And I'll start here, sort of at the end of this line, and just pull up these little wispy lines. And I'll skip a little bit and pull up more. And they sort of have a little bit of a curve to them, okay? Just a tiny bit. But what I want to be mindful of is I don't want to go into my yellow paint. So if my line is starting here and it's coming up, I can go around my yellow paint, but when I come to it, I'll just stop, okay? So again, I'm using the very tip of this brush. All right, and I'm just going to move all the way down. So here when I come to this yellow flower, I stop. But on this side, I can continue it because there's no flower there in the way. All right, so I'll continue down, and anytime I come near a yellow flower, I stop. All right, so you can see that I got a little bit into the yellow flower there. And you know, it's really fiddly if you try to keep it perfect. And the overall picture, it's not going to matter. But I can just lightly take my brush and then dab it if I want to just remove a little bit of it. But honestly, I'm not that worried about it. So I'm going to continue on getting the green on my brush, taking my brush onto my paper towel so it's not dripping wet. Okay, and then I'm just continuing down, stopping where I come to flowers. And then as I get kind of down toward the bottom, I might put one more in. And then I'm just going to take my brush and come back up the center a little bit, just to connect all of those little sprigs, okay? And if I see any open spaces in the flower, I'm just going to take my green and draw a little line where that stem might be. All right? So that's the first sprig. I'm going to move around the painting and add some leaves in here and there. So here's another really strong line that I had. So maybe I'll put a couple little sprigs here and there. And then I'm just going to connect my brush to that line, and then put little tiny green marks out to the flowers. See that? Just tiny little ones, not too much. More green on my paintbrush. Connecting it down here, anywhere where I see an open space. Okay, so I'm not going to put a ton of greenery in, but just every now and then we want the illusion that our flowers are connected to something and that they're all moving down toward the vase. So if I see areas where there's a lot of flowers, I might draw a little line up to it, okay? And connect some of these yellow flowers. We don't have to do all of them because again, it's just an illusion. Okay, so every now and then we can connect. A little more green paint. And then I'm going to move my picture around so I have a better angle. Again, I'm bringing it down here, pulling it up, connecting some of the yellow flowers, even leaving a little stem open. And we always want to make sure that our lines connect as well. Okay, so it's just this, we're using our original lines as a guide, but every now and then we'll add in a little bit more greenery. So here I'll put in a few sprigs of leaves, more green in my brush, dry it off. I'm using the very tip of my brush, okay? And then on this side, definitely have a sprig here, so I'll bring green out to follow that line. And then down here, so it's almost like I'm connecting the dots every now and then. I'm not going crazy with it, all right? And then so often I'll just put another leaf and just randomly add some of the mimosa shaped leaves. I don't need to do too many, and I'm sort of looking at it and deciding where I think it needs it. Another idea is that you could Google a mimosa plant and see how they grow and sort of mimic that as you're painting. But quite honestly, this is supposed to be the illusion of one. So right here, I'm just going to put a bigger green leaf out right over the yellow paint because I want it to sort of be in front. And then over here, I haven't done this side yet, so I'll grab more paint, dry my brush off. Follow the line that I originally drew, and then sort of connect my flowers randomly. And this might take a couple tries to practice. Okay. Adding in some green leaves where I think I need them. And on this one down here, more green paint. And connecting the dots. Okay, and then in my big clusters of yellow, I might drop in a few little green spots here and there. Okay, so I don't want to overdo it. I'm pretty happy with that, but I do want to take some of the darker green that I mixed up, get my brush nice and full with it, and then roll my brush off so it's not really wet. And then every now and then, on the green that I've already put down, I'm going to enhance it with some of this darker green. Typically, that's going to be where it would be in shadow. So at the underside of leaves, I'll use the very tip of my brush to sort of give it a little bit of oomph with my darker green. Where the leaves join the stems, see, I'm just using the tip of my brush to very lightly put in some darker green. And I'll turn my paper, always turn my paper, adding in a tiny bit of darker green here and there, especially where the leaves join the stem. These are just really small little marks just to give it a little bit of definition. using the very tip of my brush. So I'm holding my brush really far down here. So I've got a lot of control. And I'm just moving around, and anywhere I see that I've painted a leaf, I might just enhance it a tiny bit, where especially, like I said, where the leaves connect to the stems every so often. Okay, and I think that's great. Right in here, maybe a little darker. But as you paint, you'll notice, where do I need a little extra green? And that's where I'm going to drop that. Now, because our flowers are in a clear vase, we would see some of the stems coming through. So we're going to use the lighter green on our brush, and we're going to roll it to a point again so we don't have a lot of paint on our brush. And we're going to draw those stems down, okay? So I'm going to just take the tip of my brush, and where I put that green in before, I'm going to drop in a couple of stems into the vase. See, and this one might come this way, so I'm just sort of painting them on, all right? And then I'm going to take a clean, damp brush, and I'm just going to soften those lines. I'm just going right over where I put that green, just to soften it. And we're going to put another layer on our vase, so those will sort of soften even more once we do that. But I want something to anchor them, okay? And I might pull it down a little bit farther. Okay, now we're going to paint more on the vase. So our yellow flowers are dry. We don't have to worry about that. The green paint that we put on is fairly light. The coat is very light, so I'm sure those are dry by now. And so we're going to go back to that gray color and refresh our puddle of gray. I'm going to turn this a little bit. We have a nice light wash of gray. And now I'm going to start putting in some features on the vase. So I'll start at the sides. I'm going to paint around the flowers and just down the edge a little bit. And then here. And I'm just putting in some lines of gray. And I'll take my clean, damp brush and again just soften those. And pull it all the way down to the bottom. And then I'm just going to continue with my clean brush that has just a little bit of that gray left in it. So I'll grab a little more gray. And I'll go on this side as well. And I'm kind of going in between the yellow flowers and just down the side of my vase. I just want to sort of give it a little bit more of an edge. Bring it all the way down, a little bit up here, around those yellow flowers, and all the way down. And then I'll do a little bit here in the center because we probably have some water. And so I can just drop in with the tip of my brush sort of a curved line of that really pale watery gray. And then take clear water and just drop it all over in that upper area. So this is very pale. It's very, very pale and watery. And I'm leaving the bottom of the vase alone now because I want that to be more clear. But I'm just moving this water glaze sort of around the yellow flowers and in the upper part of the vase. And that just kind of makes it all misty. And then I'm going to take more of my gray, quite a bit more, and I'm going to add a touch of the wood violet to it. So I've got kind of a purpley gray. And I'm going to paint a shadow. So I'm going to start over here on the right side, and I'm just going to pull it right up to the bottom of the vase. So I'm sort of rimming the bottom of my vase in that purpley gray. And then I'm going to bring it out a little bit. And also over here, just missing those yellow flowers. And then I'm just going to use clear water and pull it right up to that paint. And then bring it down. At the bottom, I can just sort of soften it with clear water so it sort of fades. And it's okay if these run together a little bit because that's a more realistic look. It's just kind of fun to see the colors of the vase come into the shadow. And I can even take a little bit of my blue and drop it in. Make it more interesting. All right, so really all I did was rim the bottom of my vase, and I can turn, if I need a better angle, I can turn my paper and I can just smooth out that line. So all we did is rim the bottom of the vase with the grayed out violet, and then took clear water and pulled it down, and then dropped a tiny bit of pale blue in there. And then on the bottom of our little guys, little petals that fell onto the table, I can just take the tip of my brush and give them each a shadow where they touch the table. Just a little bit. And I like how that yellow actually got absorbed into the shadow on the vase. That's kind of fun. Okay, now I want to look at the overall picture and see where I need some depth. And I'm going to go back to my original yellow that I made a little bit darker with some of the wood violet, and I'm just waking it up a little bit. I don't need too much. And every now and then, on my yellow flowers, I'm just going to drop in, just touch it with some of that darker yellow, especially toward the bottoms and when they're clustered together like this, just to give it a little bit more dimension. A little bit more. And I can also take some of my straight yellow, the straight mimosa, right from the pan, and anywhere on top of the vase, I can drop some of that clear yellow just to brighten it up a bit. Now, if I feel like I need more greenery, I can go back to my Viridian, wake up that petal. Remember to always dry your brush off so you don't have a ton of paint on it. And I'm going to add a little bit more greenery right out here. So I'm going to pull a center line out and just add some of these wispy, feathery leaves. I just felt like it needed a little something on that side. So you can see when I'm doing this, I don't really have anything pre-planned in mind. I just want to create the illusion of a tiny little vase of mimosas sitting on a table. So it's not like, it's not exactly right or perfect. I'm just enjoying it and creating the illusion of this tiny little vase of flowers. I'm adding a little bit more green over here, maybe a little bit more in here. And maybe on this top sprig, now that I have it set, I can add a little bit more. There. And just go around your painting and see where you think it needs a little bit more. If you think it's fine the way it is, leave it alone. I'm just filling in places where I feel like it could use a little bit more. It's always better to start pale, and then you can add more as you go. Okay. And I'm really happy with that. It's very sweet. And I have painted a tiny vase of mimosa with my Wildthorne watercolors in the beautiful new yellow mimosa color. And I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will share it with me on your social media. I will leave all of my social media information in the description box below. And I will see you next week with another Watercolor is for Everyone video. Thanks so much for being here. I hope you'll subscribe to my channel for all the latest updates.